Onegaishimasu.
Okay, let's just take, just a moment, Zazen, just to become aware of the posture, become aware of the posture of the mind, where the mind's at. Is it really flighty? Is it the monkey mind really strong right now? So becoming aware of how the body is holding itself, how the body is in space, how the mind is in space, and then allow your breath and weight underside to settle both the body and the mind into stillness. With time and practice, everything becomes more and more self-correcting. Everything we talk about, techniques, movements, even sitting in Zazen, it becomes more and more self-correcting as our awareness becomes finer. So for example, the posture, the skeletal structure is not something that you set and forget. It's a continual adjustment, either because you get better at finding a better alignment, and also because you end up losing some of that, and you have to realize that I've slumped or I've angled off or I'm leaning, and so they'll tend to degrade till we get more practiced at staying in this open, upright position. To go a little further with that, especially those of you that have more practice with either meditation or Aikido, where this really starts to become more stable and you have much less frequency of degrading the physical posture and the mental posture, we come back into this concept, principle, and reality of space, emptiness, or space, or spaciousness. If you put space in your joints, that keeps you upright and aligned. Now then it takes time to have the stamina of intention and the endurance of your mental focus to keep that. But that's what internal arts are about, and internal martial arts as well. Developing the strength, tenacity, stamina of your mind, of your attention, not just physicality. So if you can start to, this is the next level, beyond just aligning your skeleton vertically, bone on top of bone, that's the beginning. Next, as everything else, it becomes more energetic, more mind-based, more awareness and intention-based. So once you're physically aligning yourself, next step is to put and allow space between the joints. Of course, sitting, standing, largely that's between the vertebrae, but eventually it's all the joints too. We talk about extension and opening up and lengthening. Of course, that's putting space into these other joints as well. But this posture here, Zazen, starting with allowing space between the vertebrae and allowing the space to eventually expand and increase. So just even have a playful attitude. Can you play with this idea and feeling of allowing and putting space in between the bones? And notice what that does for you and to you. Now, the last little while, we've been working with getting up off the ground, using the ground force. And of course, taking that into our movement and simply standing posture using the ground force. And getting up off the ground is actually a really good basic but deep study of using ground force to move us. But we're not going to do that specifically right now. We've done that a little bit recently. Whatever degree of access to this quality I'm talking about, space in the joints. And to start with, especially in this posture, it's between the vertebrae. Whatever degree that you have of that, we're going to stand from that and not lose that. So, maybe you've noticed you're sitting a little taller. Maybe you notice certain things relaxed and released. Notice everything that you can notice. Again, put in the intention to allow more space between the vertebrae. And then stay with that. In fact, add to that as we slowly come up. So as you slowly come up, keep the space between the vertebrae. And just notice if you lose that, and try to get it back if you do. And keep that openness in the spine. And then we'll just take that for a minute into the standing. So again, reintroducing that idea. Now we're in a different position. Putting space between the vertebrae. Eventually you allow that space to actually expand and increase. If this is new for you, you might not have room in your brain for this next part, but if you do, you start to put space into the other joints as well, hips, shoulders. And with more practice, you start to realize that this idea of putting space into your joints is really putting presence in your joints, being present. So your energetic and intentional presence starts to get very specific and also very global. As you get very specific with your intentional presence, you also get very global. Without trying, you get very global with your intentional presence. So as best you can, putting space in the hip joints, shoulder joints, along the spine. Don't forget the vertebrae of the neck. When we talk about adjusting the head, so the back of the neck is long and straight, not kinked back. If you're putting space in the vertebrae, that will happen automatically. That will happen for you. Also, the dropping the tailbone or flattening the lower back or hanging the hips, that will happen for you. That will happen to you if you're putting space in the vertebrae. We're coming back to this quality concept and actuality of self-correcting. If you put space between the vertebrae, those things change and get self-corrected for you. All the things that we talked about mechanically, to do it physically, mechanically, they happen for you automatically, self-corrected. Now, as best you can, and let me know if you have any questions or thoughts, experiences with this. Take this into movement. So take this into Minucci, and it can be a very small move because our focus is mainly not only this vertical alignment, but even more right now, space between the vertebrae. Keeping that nice and open. Now, I don't want to be doing that muscularly, stretching up. That's totally not going to be helping with this process. It's the opposite of the process we want. We do it purely intentional. So try to minimize any muscular action and efforting. It's all feeling and intention. And bring that into some movement. And you don't even have to come into a full, complete movement. It's more that if you come up to here and realize, oh, I can't keep that long open spine, I end up compromising that, then don't go that far. The main thing is this awareness of this quality, openness, lengthening, space between, and staying with that even as we go into now some movement. Releasing the abdomen. The abdomen might help. And if you can then expand that permission and allowance to also enter the shoulder joints, you'll find that your arms are longer. You might have a feeling that your fingers are touching the ground. So space in the joints, it's an intentional thing, it's an idea, it's a feeling, but it becomes physically actual. You open things up. But if I do it muscularly, I'm creating a lot of compacting, tension, resistance, fighting at the same time. And it won't allow the body to truly open, just creating conflict and tightness and resistance in the body. So right now we're not doing, sometimes we do the arm swing, right? It's a different exercise, different process. That helps the body be, these arm swings that we do, all these different arm swings, that we do are to make the body more compliant, more pliable for what we're doing now. So all these releasing, softening exercises are to make the body a better vessel, cultivate the body so it's more pliable to what we're doing now. So that if my body's softer, more open, when I put the intention somewhere to open something up, it happens more easily, more immediately. So right now I'm not doing an arm swing, so it won't swing quite so freely or probably as fast. I want everything to happen through an opening. So if you can allow that to happen through the arms, shoulder joints, elbow joints, wrist joints, even fingers perhaps. So that my arms are moving now because of an opening feeling, expanding feeling in the joints. And feel free to switch sides whenever you'd like. Go back to the spine again, open, intense space between the vertebrae, and the same feeling in some other joints, in particular, the arms. The legs, including the hips, are usually the hardest to get. So don't worry about those. You get the ones that are most accessible. And usually we talk about the shoulders first. We talk about extension. We're almost always talking about the shoulders because they're the most available to most people. The other ones take longer to get, including the spine. The spine isn't necessarily easy to access with this feeling and quality right away. Just like everything else, it takes time, practice, experience, exploring. Now let's stand in a basic hanmi. Vertebrae opening, space between the vertebrae, space in the shoulder joints. And then keep that openness as best you can as you switch. So it might sound strange and weird, but eventually you're able to feel and relate to yourself as actually a collection of spaces just as much as physical. And so at first we want to talk about our bones, the structure of our bones or a collection of bones. We want to align that collection of bones, structurize it. To go a little further with that, we become a collection of spaces between the bones. And that's what we're focusing on now. That will naturally open up the body, allow a more energetic flow. The chi is allowed to flow more freely through the entire body. You become harder to attack, harder to control in terms of the martiality of it. But beyond that, it's just much healthier, much more open, and it will open up the mind, open up the heart, open up your feelings, your energy, start to become more open and more spacious. Everybody's condensed, right? Compacted. So this is very much healthy. It integrates mind and body. And ultimately, it's very martial. It's everything. Into Sayuendo, it's simply, you'll probably go very slow because you're going with, staying with this feeling. It's like a very focused meditation. Everything is coming from and a result of opening up the spine, space in the spine between the vertebrae. And if you can, to include that into the shoulder joints and maybe a little bit more, but at the least intend to work with the space between the vertebrae and the shoulder joints. One way to help approach this, perhaps, is Each time you go to the side, imagine and feel that you reach further and further and further, further and further, further with your arm and your hand, without, of course, leaning and without straining or striving, without trying to physically stretch. You're just doing that with your feeling and your intention. Allow the joints to open to accommodate that. Allow the spine to open to accommodate. As you get taller, you'll also be able to reach further. Try that specifically in your mind, those two vectors. As you imagine and feel and intend yourself to get taller because your spine is opening, that directly relates to also being able to reach further. So length this way will also directly translate to length this way if you're open to that intention. Now, when I say length this way, it's also that way too, but I don't want to throw too much at you. If you do have room in your brain, it's also opening down this way. If not, right now, this is fine. And see if that can translate to also opening, lengthening in another vector. These are the gears that we start to work. And this is, again, very healthy for the joints. Stimulates and activates the fascia. Stimulates and stretches the connective tissue, tendons and ligaments. Okay. Now, let's go into this vertical axis. So we've talked about the primacy of forward extension for the first quite a while. We're talking about extend forward, focus forward, strong forward attitude, all those things. We're always in a forward stance, at least at first. We talk about, again, the primacy of the forward stance, developing that irimi energy, irimi attitude. Irimi is entering, forward attitude, strong forward attitude. That's to build up the strength of the mind, strength of the intention, strength of the focus. But ultimately, we want to get beyond it, past that, beyond that, more than that, because that's very limited. On a practical, couple examples of practical limitation of that is it might bring me into a bit of a leaning. Now, at first, that's a good sign. It means you have strong forward energy. It's affecting your body. So it's kind of illustrated, reflecting a strong forward focus. So it's not a bad thing as long as it's not too much. But eventually we want to refine that because it is one-dimensional. I want to ultimately and eventually be equal, omnidirectional, free. This is not free. Also in terms of martial aspect, in terms of being aware of what's behind you, I'm not only not as aware of what's behind me because I'm so focused forward, I'm more exposed physically. Even if I'm not leaning so much, if I'm focused just forward, I'm not really awake back here. So that's both martially and just, again, health-wise, energetically. Am I globally open? Or am I strong in one direction? Yes, flowing in one direction, maybe even open in one direction, but that means other parts are closed off, which means they're dead in a sense. They're not living, not alive, not flowing. So we now become more and more aware of the central axis, and it's best if it's back towards the spine, because if it's right in the middle of the body, you'll still tend to be forward. So right back, you can think of an axis going, an energy line going through your spine, and even better, perhaps, would be slightly behind the spine. So we were just talking about just recently, just on the back of the spine, like on the skin, and we have done this class where a partner takes a joe, holding the joe vertically, puts it on the back of your spine. You put it on the back of my spine. So then I have this tactile impression. I have this palpable experience of my back, that vertical line along my physical back, and that keeps me, that anchor for my attention keeps me more anchored vertically. It verticalizes me. So whatever you can access right now, whatever comes easiest for you, imagining a vertical line through the spine itself, or just a little bit behind the spine, play with that, see what is more real for you right now. Just standing here. Putting your awareness down the spine or just down along the spine behind it. Energizing that plane, that axis, that line, as if almost all of you exists there. But that's where most of you is, on that line behind. Most of us are totally frontal. Our eyes are in front, of course, mouth in front, hands are work in front. So there's a dead area behind us. So once we activate what's normally numb or somewhat asleep, we wake that up, it wakes everything up. So waking up this back sense, this line in the back, will even everything out, open everything out and up. So now that you have this, your awareness, your attention dwelling along that back line, because without the intention to do so, it'll be somewhere else. So using the intention to put that awareness back there, slowly come into a Hanmi, keeping that, and then come back. Energize it again, re-energize it, try to keep it as you step into a forward stance, but you're not going to be physically forward. Stay back here even as you move forward. And notice, feel, and notice what happens and what doesn't happen. Okay, now, we often work with contrasting because it reveals many things that we wouldn't necessarily notice. It illuminates many, many things. So what I'd like you to do is this time, go back, we're going to forget about, on purpose, intentionally forget about that back axis. And either with a strong, normal, strong Irimi focus forward, or just normal, go into a forward stance and notice the feeling. Notice what you notice now without that back axis. If you have a mirror, great. If you don't, imagine you can see yourself from the side. Feel the angle of your body. Feel the feeling of your body when you come into a forward stance without that back axis awareness. Okay, now let's go back to energizing that back axis. Make it a very fine, clean line, almost like it could be a laser beam, a fine line, either going through the spine or right behind it. Energize it, prioritize it, and as best you can, keep your awareness there, your mind there, keep that energized as you step into a so-called forward stance. And again, keep your awareness open to notice how that's different from when you don't energize that back axis. Okay, let's get a little bit of feedback here. It's what did you notice between those two? Any differences? What did you notice physically, energetically? Any difference?
So definitely for me, I felt a sense with the awareness in the back column, more of a sense of, you've talked about this maybe more in Tai Chi, like of mind body, that sense of the movement forward happened before the movement happened. Mm-hmm. and contrasted with the quality of like fully forward that actually really felt stronger, but I totally left, like there's no sense of myself behind at all.
So there's no part of you that's left behind the movement.
Well, just like with only focus forward, like any sense I had of what was behind me vanished completely. Like it was like all of my mind was
Right.
forward. In keeping my mind in the back of me, it was easier to access that sense of putting my mind forward and then just joining that mental shape physically.
Right. And again, martially, this opens up your rear intuition, your rear instincts. So literally, you're more sensitive, alert, more viable, more potentially able to protect yourself from something from the rear. Like literally, it will develop that sense, because that sense is not used by people. Not only most people, they don't have this, the irimi, they have this, right? That's right here. So we start with strong outward focus, but that's not the end point. So this will stimulate that back awareness, open up that sense, ability to sense back there, and physically, energetically balance you out, make you more even, balanced, complete. Anybody else? What was the difference that you noticed?
For me, I felt that was really awesome. Thank you. I felt a lot of pressure leave my back, like, and I felt like the full circle around me. That was awesome.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
A lot of pressure was gone from my back. So anyway,
Right, okay.
that's me.
So you're already feeling that full circumference of awareness. So that's great. Another, that just triggered another thing that could happen when if this is new for you. When you come back to something that's truly vertical, it may feel like you're this, so you're actually leaning. So if I'm just standing normal, most people aren't totally perfect in their posture. And if you put them back into a nice, good vertical posture, they'll feel like they're doing this. Or the reverse works the same way too. If I have bad posture this way, and some people have posture like this, then you verticalize them, they will feel like they're doing forward leading. So I'm just saying that it might not necessarily feel good right away. In fact, it might be hard to get a sense of where straight up and down and vertical. That's where a mirror is very helpful. Or maybe even the zoom lens camera for yourself. You can, okay, I think I'm straight there. Oh, not really. There's more straight. And that feels like I'm back here maybe perhaps. So it takes a while for the body to get a good map of really where it is, because we get locked into these patterns. And that becomes our home. It becomes our territory. So we need to have a clearer map. A mirror can give you a clearer map of where that line is. So one of the things that I notice very physically is when I have a strong forward energy, irimi, that's what we want at the beginning. When I compare that to being more anchored through this vertical line at the back, when I have just the forward and not that vertical line, I notice physically I'm up in more into my upper body. And I'm right here at this line here, at the hips, at this line here, at the waist, I'm angled. I'm making it bigger right now, so you can see it. Certainly I don't lean this much, but when I have a strong forward energy flow, but no back axis, this breaks here, and I'm up here in my body. And so then when I compare that to having that clear back axis, I drop more evenly through my hips into my lower body. So I'm not up here, and I'm straightened. So again, in comparison, I'm poured into my upper body, leaning into my upper body, and broken here, bent here. So these are things those two things will happen to pretty much everybody. So that's something that's there to notice, because that's going to be pretty much universal. So standing here, energizing that, opening up the spine. If you want to bring a couple of things into this, we started with space in the spine. They're not exactly the same thing. They're related, so you don't have to bring them together right now, but eventually you will. Main thing right now is having that nice, clear line through the spine or just behind the spine. Maybe touching the skin of your back along the spine. coming forward into Minucci, and going back and forth, keeping energizing the spine. And maybe you'll notice that, oh, I'm actually feel like I'm back here a little bit. So I'm probably now more vertical for the first time, which means before I was doing a little bit of leaning. So as best you can, keep that energized as you slowly go forward and back. Of course, it's a further challenge to bring these things into movement. So feel totally free to come back to just neutral standing for a few moments to re-energize, to recollect that vertical feeling, that axis, and then again attempt to bring that into movement. Release the abdomen. It's always helpful. One of the things that I'm experiencing is that I'm becoming the back of my head, the back of my scalp, the back of my skull is becoming alive and energized. It's literally tingling. Now, if you need to come back, do that, re-energize, and then go into Minucci with the turn, with the Tenkai. The main thing is you're focusing on that vertical axis. You're not too concerned about a good Minucci. Our main focus is, can I keep that energized vertical axis right through the spine or right behind the spine? And then it's good to notice what that does to you and for you. Notice what that does to you and for you. Now, what I'd like you to do is come back to standing, re-energize that. If you lost it, get it back. If you still have it, make it even clearer and stronger. Now, let's just take this just for a moment into regular movement. Just walk about the room. Just walk, just amble about with that as your main focus. And notice how that feels different. Notice what's happening in your body and how it feels when you're just doing normal, regular movement with a more energized, clarified back axis. Notice what that does for you and how it feels, how that compares to what you normally are feeling and doing. Let me know if you have any comments.
For me, it is new posture.
Pardon me?
It is new posture for me because I don't keep myself straight. I always sound like this, you know?
So it's totally a new posture.
Yes.
Totally a new line.
Yeah.
That's going to be the case for almost everybody, for pretty much everybody. It's going to be a totally new line. It might even feel out of balance for a while. For, as I mentioned before, a very simple example is I might feel like I'm back here because I've been this way for many, many, many years. So if I'm walking and I feel like I'm back here, it might feel like a little bit like you're out of balance or weird because you're in a different world. You're in a different alignment. I spent 20 years like this and someone straightened me up. Finally, after 20 years, I'll feel like I'm doing this when actually I'm straight. So it'll take a while for everything to reintegrate and become comfortable and at home with that alignment, that verticalized, pristine alignment. Now, let's go back into some other movement that we do. Let's do Tenkan Undo 90 degrees. And if you want to start without doing the arms, that's fine. Probably want to pause before you start. Re-energize that vertical line. Maybe imagine someone is holding a Joe, lightly pressing a Joe, holding a Joe against your spine. You're feeling that length of that Joe right from the back of your head, down through the neck, between the shoulder blades, through the mid-back, through the low back, through the tailbone. Someone's holding that to your back, even as you move. And so you have to keep contact back into that Joe. You have to keep contact with your spine back into that surface that's immediately behind you. Keep contact with that. Keep your awareness there. And if you want, you can bring the arms into the movement, but your main focus is pressing back into that Joe, keeping awareness and contact with that Joe or that line immediately behind you. Another thing that I'll share with you, I find this really opens up my ribs, my chest, like really opens, physically opens my body up, and therefore energetically opens everything up. This whole area, ribs, thorax area, chest, sternum, feels like it's being opened, almost like a rib spreader, but in a very energetic, comfortable way. I feel like literally my ribs are being opened and spread apart through the whole cage, the whole chest cage, not just the ribs. Okay, so let's come back to, let's do some misogi from that place, from that alignment, from that feeling. So I won't talk too much about the breathing. You know the breathing. We want to focus on having this alignment as I do misogi. So it's still the main focus. And I think we're just going to finish. I'll let the Zoom class go out as we do this. It's always good for you guys to do the bow, like I do the bow, whether I'm on camera or not. Finish class, I always do a bow, so it's good for you guys to do that. And we'll just continue this. We've only got a few moments. Elongate the spine, even as the arms go out. Open space between the vertebrae. That axis is right through the spine or just behind it. Feel that through the back of the neck, back of the head. See if you can take this into your day. Notice when you lose it, and now you know how to get it back. Get it back instantly. You get it back, no pun intended. But you can get it back instantly to one extent or the other. Feel what it does to your front. All this back work, back axis,